Ratios and more, our summary and discussion. What is a ratio as a mathematical object? Where do we use ratios in statistics? And how else is comparing quantities helpful in making sense of our world? For instance, analyzing a data set that you have using ratios. In your student sample response, I went with something like a ratio is an object in mathematics that allows us to compare two or more quantities. For example, the speed of water flowing into a river from a drain, taking us back to this imagery here, the water flow. You could think about water flowing in gallons per second or liters per hour, things like that. You can measure it annually, seasonally, daily. Using ratios helps us make sense of how the quantities in the world around us are changing or staying the same. Is their behavior typical or is it atypical? Where do we use ratios in statistics? Here we go. When we're calculating the mean, it is a measure of center that we can use when our data shows to be symmetric. And for it to be symmetric, it needs to be ordered numerically. It can't just be categorical, like what color shirt is somebody wearing or how many people are wearing this color shirt. It needs to be more specific. It needs to be ordered. So we need the number system for the order. And we have to make sure that we're respecting zero. So proportional relationships especially have a special relationship with zero, that when one quantity is zero, the other is also zero. This is a non-example is the Fahrenheit temperature system. 32 degrees is the freezing point of water. So there's sort of like a mix match between the zeros here in that situation. But anyway, back to where do we use ratios and statistics? Comparison of the total sum of values in the data set to the count or the number of data points in a set of data. So you're doing the average is the total sum compared to total number of observations, which gives us this idea of a unit rate or an average rate of change when we get those total values divided by how many there are, total per single unit. And that gives us this average rate of change. So even though temperatures go up and down, even though that the water usage is higher during shower times in the morning and less at night when everybody's sleeping, we can use unit rates to help us think about bigger scale, like what on average, how much water is being used in a day or in a morning or in the months of the summer months or the winter months or the in 2000 versus 2022, things like that. Okay. And then comparing about like when you have different average rates of change, when is it most typical? When is it not typical? Is there something we need to be worried about? Is there a mistake in the data? Things like that. Okay. And then how else is comparing quantities helpful for making sense of our world? So exactly that. If water usage is abnormally high in a town during a certain time frame, is the meter system measuring correctly? Is there a leak? Is there overpopulation that, like our water system isn't prepared to handle? It's just, those are things that ratios are essential in computing means or averages, and this measure of center is common in our world with symmetric data sets and noticing typical behaviors and asking questions when the data is not super typical or changes behaviors. Data is important to recognize that it gives us a good story about what's happening within the data set. And you have to always be careful when you use a data set to make a guess about what happened before or after. But it can, in real time, it can be super helpful. It's helpful in asking questions, I think, not always paying respect to every individual represented in the data set, but it gives this like greater picture. It's important to know that in ratio thinking in statistics, it's really reliant on this law of large numbers, that if you gather data from a big enough source, if your denominator is big enough, then what's happening in the numerator, it should tease out the abnormal data points and really help the data analyst see the center. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope to see you all soon, and send me emails with any questions you have.